Hey there. Tonight's story isn't about knights riding into battle or kings making grand speeches. It's about someone history rarely stops to notice. A girl in the Middle Ages. You could be born in a smoky, one-room cottage or in a castle with cold stone walls. It wouldn't matter much. The path ahead of you is already marked. Your voice will be soft, your steps careful, and your life full of rules, prayers, and work. Some days will pass quietly, others will be filled with pain. No one bothers to write down. But you'll keep going, because that's what everyone expects. So let the candles burn low. Let the sound of chapel bells fade. Step quietly into a world you were never meant to rule, but were expected to endure. And like so many things in this age, our story begins in the dark. A girl's life in medieval Europe starts with blood, the blood of childbirth. But it's not the noisy, chaotic scene that movies like to show. There's no racing through the streets, no shouting men in the doorway. Birth, here is a women's affair. The chamber is prepared, warmed if possible, herbs steeped in bowls, a midwife summoned, and any man who tries to step inside is firmly told to wait outside and try not to faint. If you're born to nobility, your mother's room might be draped with bright tapestries, a brazier glowing in the corner. If you're born to a peasant family, the birthing room is just a cleared space near the hearth, firelight flickering across a floor covered in straw. But the feeling in the air is always the same, hushed, serious, and edged with fear. The midwife is the most important person here. She doesn't have gleaming instruments or a surgeon's tools. What she has is knowledge, passed from woman to woman for generations. She knows when to brew raspberry leaf tea to ease labor pains, when to burn bay leaves to cover the smell of blood, and when to send for a priest, because birth is dangerous. 1 in 3 women will die from it in her lifetime. And for the baby, survival is far from guaranteed. 1 in 4 will die before their first birthday. The newborn is a girl, the celebration is quieter. Especially in noble families where sons mean inheritance and power. Still, there's hope. Hope she will live. Hope she will marry well. Hope she will bear sons of her own. The church teaches that pain in childbirth is Eva's fault, the price all women must pay for that forbidden fruit. Women are told their suffering is holy, a spiritual burden to be carried with grace. In especially difficult births, holy relics might be brought in, a scrap from a saint's robe, a tiny piece of the true cross, water from a well said to cure fevers. If death seems near, the midwife might baptize the baby herself. Better a rushed baptism than an unbaptized soul. Once the child is breathing and alive, she needs a name. For a peasant girl, it might be something plain but beloved. Alice, Agnes, Matilda. Names of saints, grandmothers, or whatever the priest prefers. For a noble girl, the name must carry family weight. Isabel, Eleanor, chosen to honor an ancestor or seal a family alliance. Baptism follows quickly, sometimes within hours. The baby, wrapped tightly in linen, is taken to a church that smells of damp stone and candle wax. The font is cold. The water is colder. The godparents are chosen not just for faith, but for what they can offer. Protection, a future guardian if the parents die. For the church, baptism isn't about celebration. And the mother has her own ritual to go through, churching about 40 days later. She's blessed by the priest, purified, and allowed back into the church. Some women find it comforting. Others quietly resent it. After all, her body brought life into the world. Why must it be cleansed first? But custom is custom. From then on, life for the baby girl is about survival. She is swaddled tightly in cloth, her arms pinned to her sides, her legs bound straight. People believe it keeps her warm, safe, and even morally upright. A restless baby is seen as disobedient. A noble baby might sleep in a carved cradle rocked by a nursemaid. A peasant baby lies in a simple wooden bed, tended by her mother while she stirs a pot, watches older children, and keeps an ear on the livestock. Feeding depends on who you are. Peasant mother breastfeeds if she can. A noble woman often hires a wet nurse, believing it will keep her figure and free her to return to courtly life. Great care is taken in choosing that wet nurse. No bad temper, no loose morals, no garlic on her breath. People believe her milk shapes the child's character. Weaning comes early, sometimes at 6 months, replaced by bread soaked in milk or mashed grains. She grows into a small child. The girl's path becomes clear. Her world is narrower than her brother's. Boys may learn to read, to fight, to inherit land. Girls learn to wait, to serve, to be chosen, to become what their family needs. A marriage bond, a dowry, a womb for the next generation. Even her games hint at her future. Boys swing sticks like swords and climb trees. Girls rock dolls, pretend to sweep, weave grass into ribbons. A noble girl might be sent away to another household as a lady-in-waiting, learning manners and politics while serving an older woman. A peasant girl stays home, learning to bake, spin, mend, and pray. Childhood is short. If she makes it past age 7, she's expected to work and behave like a small adult. And she learns other things too, things not spoken out loud, to lower her gaze, how to keep her voice soft, how to smile politely at older men who take too much interest. For a noble girl, fine dresses and jewelry are not freedom, they're a contract. Her virginity is a bargaining chip in political marriages. For a peasant girl, survival is the skill, stretching food, soothing a crying baby, keeping peace in the home. But it's not all grim. There are moments of joy, playing in the yard with siblings, the warmth of a dog curled at her feet, the smell of fresh bread and herbs drying in the rafters, the stolen minutes between chores to hum a tune or dream of somewhere far away. As night falls, the village is still. In one cottage, girls in wool tunics huddle together, whispering secrets. In a manor house, a young lady presses a wax seal on a letter she will never send. In a blacksmith's home, a daughter watches sparks fly and dreams of something unnamed. Tomorrow, they will be told again what's expected of them. But tonight, the fire crackles, the night deepens, and the world, for a moment, is gentle. Of course, drying them discreetly meant finding a place away from male eyes, away from the communal hearth, where everyone's clothing hung steaming. A corner near the bed, a spot behind the bread oven, even a tree limb hidden by brambles might serve as the place where a girl. Menstrual cloths fluttered out of sight. If a stranger saw them, the gossip would travel faster than any market rumor. Gossip in the Middle Ages could cling longer than the scent of smoke and wool. The experience of menstruation was therefore not only physical, but deeply social. A girl now carried a kind of invisible ledger of what she must hide, what she must control, and how she must present herself. Her movements were more measured. Her speech became more guarded. In rural communities, the shift from child to woman could also bring new work and new dangers. She might be sent farther afield to tend sheep or accompany the cart to market. She might be told to keep her veil on outdoors, not for warmth, but as a signal of modesty. For a noble girl, the onset of her monthly bleeding was almost a legal milestone. It meant she could be considered marriageable. Suitors might be discussed, alliances measured, dowries weighed. Her own feelings on the matter were rarely part of the calculation. The body's new rhythm was a calendar her family could not ignore. If she was betrothed, the clock to her wedding day might begin to tick, and quickly. Marriage in the medieval world was not an affair of hearts and candlelight, but of property, power, and survival. For peasants, a girl might wed in her mid to late teens, often to a man chosen for the land he could work, or the security he could provide. Among the nobility, the age could be younger still, though consummation might be delayed until she was deemed physically ready. The vows, however, could bind her long before her body had fully grown. In preparation for this role, she would be taught not just how to run a household, but how to navigate the subtler currents of influence, when to speak on behalf of her husband, when to mediate disputes among servants, and when to remain silent even if she disagreed. A noble bride was expected to be the quiet diplomat of her household, a weaver not only of cloth but of alliances, of appearances, of social obligations. A peasant girl's instruction for marriage was less polished but no less vital. She needed to know how to keep bread from molding in damp weather, how to store ale so it would not sour, how to stretch a rabbit into stew enough to feed 6. Her wedding might not be recorded in any illuminated manuscript, but it was no less significant in the life of her community. The joining of 2 households could mean another pair of hands at harvest, another cow in the byre, another small plot under cultivation. Yet whether noble or peasant, A girl's value was increasingly measured in her ability to bear children. This expectation came wrapped in both reverence and dread. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was dangerous. It was understood that a woman's life might be the cost of continuing the family line. Still, from the moment her fertility was acknowledged, the cultural weight of that possibility pressed upon her. And here, religion entered again with its double-edged message, that motherhood was a sacred calling modeled by the Virgin Mary, yet also the repayment of Eve's ancient debt. Pain in childbirth was not only natural, but divinely decreed. Any reluctance a girl might feel toward this destiny was rarely spoken aloud. Instead, she embroidered linens for her future dowry chest, learned the prayers for safe delivery, and listened in silence to the stories older women told in the warm shadows of the hearth. For some, though, there was another path. The convent. A girl whose family dedicated her to the church could avoid marriage entirely. Though she did not escape the expectations of discipline, obedience, and service. Within cloistered walls, menstruation was handled with the same secrecy, but here it was accompanied by long hours of prayer, manual labor, and study. Some girls found real contentment in this life. Others saw it as a cage of stone instead of one of flesh and duty. Whichever road she traveled, the shift from girl to woman in the Middle Ages was rarely hers to direct. It unfolded under the gaze of family, neighbors, priest, and sometimes the entire village. Every action was weighed against her reputation, and every misstep could follow her for years. But within that tight web of expectation, there remained spaces for quiet defiance. A meeting of eyes across a market stall, a whispered joke with a sister, a moment alone at the stream where she could let the water carry away her thoughts, and tomorrow she would rise again before the dawn. Because the goat would still need milking, the hearth still needed tending, and the spindle still waited. A medieval girl didn't own much, maybe one, maybe two, changes of linen if she was lucky. Privacy was a luxury almost no one could afford. Clean water was hard to come by, and staying clean was even harder. When her first monthly bleeding came, she learned quickly to whisper about it, only with other women. Sage, yarrow, mugwort. The names of herbs passed from mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor, never written down, never spoken aloud where men could hear. These remedies weren't just about easing the pain. They were about surviving. The village noticed her now. Maiden, that was the word they used. It meant she was of marriageable age. Even if she still felt like a child, suitors might appear, sent by their mothers, or nudged forward by matchmakers. She'd be observed in quiet ways. At church, while sewing, while walking to fetch water. The compliments were predictable, modest, skilled with a needle, not too quick to speak. Her reputation became a kind of currency. One wrong word, one glance held too long at the wrong boy, and the gossip would begin. Among peasants, a careless smile could mark her as fast. Among nobles, it could make her seem unchaste. Either way, the stain was hard to wash away. She couldn't talk about her womanhood openly, but the entire community seemed to feel free to judge it. For noble girls, these years were filled with lessons. How to run a household, how to manage servants, how to bear children, preferably sons, and how to be polite without drawing too much notice. She was taught to obey her father now, and one day her husband. For peasant girls, the work didn't change much. There were still fields to weed, bread to bake, animals to feed, but the way people looked at her changed. She was now expected to act like a grown woman. Modest, hard-working, fertile, and always the warnings came. Don't walk into the woods alone. Don't linger at the well. Don't trust boys with sweet words. Desire was never explained, only danger. The church spoke often of temptation, women as both fragile and dangerously tempting, blamed whether they gave in or fought back. A man's sin was her fault for luring him. A woman's sin was hers alone. In convents, marriage wasn't the end goal, but the shame around the female body stayed. Nuns bled too. Nuns were warned about impure thoughts, even dreams. Some women chose that life for faith. Others were placed there because their families had too many daughters and not enough dowry money. In the convent, her letters could be read, her silence measured, her obedience noted. And in all of this, marriage loomed. Marriage wasn't a romance. It was a transaction. Among peasants, it might be sealed with nothing more than a handshake over a jug of ale. Your Tom will marry my Alice after harvest. No paperwork, just the word of neighbors. Among nobles, marriage deals were written in contracts, sealed with wax, witnessed by clerks. It could take months or years to arrange. And the girl herself rarely asked for her opinion. The legal marriage age was 12 for girls, 14 for boys. Many married later, but not all. Some girls were promised at 6 and married at 14, just as their monthly bleeding began. Dowries were the bargaining chips. A noble girl might bring land, silver goblets, or fine fabrics to her husband's family. A peasant girl might bring a pig, a bed, or a spinning wheel. No dowry meant fewer choices, and often a poorer match. Once betrothed, she was under close watch. She was now a future wife, and expected to walk with lowered eyes, speak only when spoken to, and protect her virtue above all else. Noble girls were often sent to live with their future in-laws to learn the household rules before marriage. The wedding itself could be quick and plain for peasants. Vows outside a church. Bread and ale, maybe dancing if the weather was kind. For nobles, it could be a grand feast lasting days with music, roasted meats, and Latin blessings. Then came the bedding ceremony. Among the common folk, neighbors might just watch the couple walk to the bedroom. In noble homes, the event could be far more public, with jokes, prayers, and even witnesses to ensure the marriage was consummated. Sheets stained with blood could be displayed the next day as proof. For most brides, no one had told them what to expect. Advice from older women could be as soft as, "Don't move and it'll be over quickly," or as blunt as, "It won't take long." The church permitted sex only for making children, and wives were told never to refuse their husbands, yet also never to enjoy it too much. In marriage, a woman's body was no longer hers, belonged to her husband in the eyes of the law, the church, and most of society. She knew deep down that survival was never guaranteed. Each pregnancy was a gamble with her life as the wager. And yet most women faced it with a kind of quiet courage, the sort not celebrated in epic poems or carved into church walls, but passed down in kitchen whispers and in the steady grip of a laboring woman's hand. When the child was born healthy, joy spilled into the room like light through a cracked shutter. There would be laughter, blessings, the clinking of cups. A neighbor might rush to the hearth to stir the broth already simmering. Someone would wrap the newborn in linen, warm from sitting by the fire. But the relief was always tempered by the knowledge that winter fevers or summer plagues could still carry the child away before their first steps. Death, in the medieval world, was never far from the cradle. Mothers kept charms pinned inside swaddling cloth, muttered prayers over sleeping infants, and marked thresholds with chalk crosses. They listened for omens and owl's cry, a dog howling at night, and they trusted the old women who knew which herbs to hang in the rafters and which to steep in milk. As children grew, they became part of the work of the household almost as soon as they could walk. Boys followed their fathers into the fields, learned to handle tools or tended animals. Girls shadowed their mothers, learning to spin, cook, mend, and manage the countless small tasks that kept a family alive. Play existed, but always under the shadow of chores. Even in towns where children might watch puppet shows or join processions on feast days, work was never far behind. Education for girls was rare, but not impossible. Noble daughters might learn to read, to keep accounts, and to write letters, skills essential for managing estates when husbands were away. In towns, daughters of merchants sometimes received training in trade alongside their brothers. But for most peasant girls, learning came from observation, repetition, and the occasional snippet of advice passed between stirring the pot and stoking the fire. Courtship, if it could be called that, often began early. Marriages were contract alliances between families, businesses, or estates. Love was a pleasant accident, not an expectation. But even within these arrangements, affection could grow, and in rare cases, women managed to influence their choice of husband through persistence, charm, or sheer luck. Still, the rules were strict, the punishments severe. A girl caught in a liaison without her family's consent risked not only her reputation but her very future. Gossip could ruin her chances of a decent match, and without marriage, survival was harder. For widows, as before, Life could open new doors. But for unmarried young women without protection, the world was unforgiving. Life's rhythm was dictated by seasons and the church calendar. Lent brought fasting and plain meals. Easter brought feasts. Advent brought preparation. Each feast day carried its own customs, processions, and obligations. Women baked special breads, brewed ales, stitched new garments for celebrations. And beneath it all, the steady pulse of survival tending the land. Managing households, raising children, enduring the small indignities and great hardships of life never stopped. In this world, women learned the art of subtle influence. A softly spoken suggestion here, a well-timed piece of advice there. A woman might not speak in the council hall, but she could guide her husband's vote. She might not sign the ledger, but she could direct which debts were paid first. In kitchens, markets, and over the spinning wheel, women exchanged knowledge, recipes, remedies, gossip, warnings. And though the church held tight to its teachings, folk beliefs thrived. Women still tied red threads to cradles to ward off the evil eye, placed iron under beds to repel spirits, or scattered salt across thresholds. The sacred and the superstitious lived side by side, woven into the daily fabric of life. Through all of it, they endured not as saints, not as silent martyrs, but as resourceful, practical, sometimes defiant human beings. They knew when to hold their tongues and when to risk speaking. They knew that survival was not just about keeping breath in one's body, but about carving out small spaces of freedom and joy in a world that offered them little of either. She worked with her hands from sunrise to sunset and often beyond. Day by day, she nursed her children while grinding grain, sang lullabies while mending socks. She knew which herbs cooled a fever, how to wrap a baby tight in swaddling, and how to ease colic with fennel water. She understood her husband's needs even when she was bone-tired, and quietly shared her worries with her sister-in-law when her monthly bleeding didn't come. These were things women didn't speak of in public, but she knew them as surely as she knew how to breathe. Picture her now, lying in a low bed, hands swollen, the air heavy with herbs and melted wax. Dogs bark outside in the night. Her baby cries beside her, cheeks red with hunger. She pulls the child close, humming the same tune her mother once sang to her. The world still spins, demanding more from her, but for this moment, she is still. Let her sleep. Morning comes early. In the Middle Ages, a peasant woman's workday began before dawn and ended long after dark. If it ended at all, she wasn't just a housewife. She was a farmhand, cook, brewer, midwife, weaver, shepherd, mother, and, if needed, a roof thatcher. Her life ran on tasks, repeated day after day, season after season, all for the sake of survival. And history books talk about kings, crusades, and coronations. But most people were poor, and many of the poor were women. Women in rough wool clothing, bent over work from the cradle to the grave. At dawn, there's no alarm clock. The rooster crows, dogs stir, and the baby wails. The small cottage is dim. Fire's gone out overnight. The thatched roof drips in one corner. She gets up barefoot on the packed dirt floor, pushes aside the ashes, coaxes kindling into flame. Smoke curls into the rafters and out through the hole in the roof. Ash breakfast is whatever's left from last night. Porridge if they're lucky, stale bread, maybe cheese or a dried apple. An ale, even in the morning. Water isn't safe to drink, so ale is the daily drink for everyone, even the children. She brooded herself. Before the day's real work begins, the children are dressed, the cow is milked, the chickens fed, the pig fussed over. A peasant woman's labor kept the manor running. On the Lord's land, families owed days of work in exchange for the right to farm. Men plowed and repaired fences. Women gleaned grain, pulled weeds, spun flax, gathered firewood. They worked in the fields with babies on their backs, or left the older children in charge of the little ones. The world was the nursery. Even at home, there was no rest. Spinning wool into thread was constant work. So common, it became a symbol of womanhood itself. The spinning tool, called a distaff, even gave us the old term for the women's side of the family. She spun while walking, minding sheep, or watching the stew pot. Thread meant clothes. Clothes she made herself from start to finish. Carding wool. Dyeing yarn. sewing and mending tunics until they were more patch than fabric. She brewed ale too, just as important as bread. Weak ale, called small beer, was drunk daily by everyone. Brewing was hot, sticky, fragrant work, boiling malted barley with water, adding herbs for flavor. Some women made extra to sell, hanging a sign outside to show the batch was ready. But brewing could be risky. If an alewife watered her beer or overcharged, she could be fined or shamed. And then there was food. She grew cabbages, leeks, beans, onions. She tended herbs for cooking, medicine, or even luck. She baked bread, stewed turnips with bone, made pottage, a ketchel soup, of whatever was on hand. Fresh fruit was rare, meat rarer still. Every scrap was used. Waste didn't exist because it couldn't. Children were always there, needing care, teaching, and work of their own. A woman might bear 8 or 10 children, but many would die young. Those who survived began working early, guarding geese, scaring birds from crops, carrying firewood. Girls learned housework from their mothers. Boys learned farming from their fathers. School was almost unheard of. The year turned with the seasons, planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in autumn, mending and spinning in winter. Feasts and holy days broke the monotony, but work never really stopped. Her clothes were plain, a linen shift under a wool gown, an apron, a headscarf. Shoes, if she had them, were simple leather. She lived in a one-room cottage with her family. Perhaps an elderly parent, and more mice than she'd like. The floor was dirt, the bedding straw, the walls wattle and daub. Privacy didn't exist, and yet she endured. She laughed with her neighbors, took pride in her skills, found joy in the rare good moments. A healthy baby, a plentiful harvest, a night without rats. Tonight, picture her lying beside the hearth, embers glowing red. Her back aches, her hands are rough, but her stomach is full for once. She hums to her baby as the wind brushes the thatch. Tomorrow she'll rise before dawn, but tonight she sleeps. She's earned it. They leaned on allies. They knew when to flatter, when to threaten, and when to simply wait until the winds of justice shifted. In the medieval world, patience could be as potent as any weapon. Some women became masters of the accidental delay, not showing up to court until the weather turned, or until the accuser's case collapsed under its own weight. Others weaponized piety, appearing barefoot with hair unbound, weeping beneath a crucifix while reciting psalms until even the sternest official hesitated to condemn them. It wasn't fair, it wasn't equal, but it was survival. And survival could turn into something more. In rare cases, a woman's skill in navigating law and community disputes made her indispensable. A widow with influence might be sought out to mediate quarrels. A midwife who knew everyone's secrets might ensure no one dared cross her. A noblewoman managing her absent husband's estates might hold sway over entire villages. Dispensing justice from the Great Hall while scribes recorded her verdicts in careful Latin, these moments of power were often temporary, tied to widowhood, codicized, or circumstance. But they left impressions that lingered in local memory for decades. Still, danger was never far away. One wrong word to the wrong person could undo a lifetime of careful maneuvering. The same tongue that had defended a neighbor in court might be the one accused of gossip the next year. A healing charm given in kindness could be rebranded as sorcery if the patient died. For women, the medieval legal stage was a narrow bridge. Too timid, and you were ignored. Too bold, and you were punished. And yet they walked it. Some trembling, some striding. They understood that law was not an abstract ideal, but a living, breathing thing shaped by the people who enforced it. Bailiff who liked you might overlook a fine. Okay, a priest who disliked you could make your life a slow-burning hell. It was a game of relationships, of timing, and of reputation, all played under the shadow of rules written by others. Picture a market morning in a small English town. The air smells of fish, wool, and ale. And the marketplace, to women neighbors for 20 years, are shouting over the price of a broken cartwheel. Behind them, a town clerk scribbles notes, ready to summon them to the manor court if the quarrel escalates. Round him, other women barter, weigh grain, and quietly note who is speaking to whom. A passing friar raises his eyebrows. The bailiff, leaning on a post, watches with the faintest smile. Justice here is not a gavel striking a desk. It is 100 small acts of watching, remembering, and deciding whose story will be believed. And that, perhaps more than any statute, was the reality of medieval justice for women. Not the grand proclamations, but the whispered bargains, the measured silences, and the calculated risks taken in the name of survival. The record books may show fines, verdicts, and sentences, but between those lines lies the real law. The law women wrote for themselves in the margins of their lives. Sometimes they leaned on their neighbors' loyalty, especially in small villages, where everyone knew everyone else's business and could be persuaded to remember things a certain way. Other times, they threw themselves on the mercy of the court, knowing that a judge or bailiff might enjoy the feeling of granting clemency to a poor widow or a wronged wife. And of course, there were those who simply ignored the law entirely. In the countryside, far from the eyes of officials, people settled disputes on their own. Stolen chicken might be avenged with a stolen bushel of grain. Fence moved a few feet into your land might be accidentally pushed back in the night. A neighbor who spread malicious gossip could find her laundry mysteriously missing from the line. This quiet, unofficial justice, petty revenge, mutual threats, whispered bargains, kept many quarrels from ever reaching the courts. But when a case did reach the authorities, it became public property. The spectacle of justice was, in many ways, as important as justice itself. Court hearings were often held in open spaces. Market squares, church porches, the manor hall with its backed chair for the lord or his steward. Villagers gathered to listen, not out of civic duty, but for entertainment. After all, there was no theater, no radio, no cheap novels. The court was drama reel, lives, high stakes, and the occasional burst of scandal. 8. For a woman, being called before the court was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was dangerous. Her reputation could be shredded in a single afternoon. On the other, it was a rare stage on which she might speak, argue, and be heard by the whole community. Even if she lost her case, the story might travel in a way that gave her leverage later. Some women became famous or infamous for their courtroom appearances. Records survive of women who appeared again and again, not as hardened criminals, but as stubborn personalities who refused to be silenced. One 15th century London woman, Agnes, was charged 3 separate times for riotous speech against her neighbors. Each time, she talked her way into a reduced fine, smiling sweetly as she left. Is she genuinely charming, or simply too much trouble to punish? The records don't say, but they do keep her name alive centuries later. Of course, medieval law wasn't just about thefts, brawls, or property disputes. It was also about controlling behavior, especially women's behavior. Morality offenses, like adultery, fornication, or even dancing on a Sunday, could land a woman in trouble. Here, the church and the civil courts often overlapped. In some towns, the local priest might be the first to hear of such sins in the confessional, and the first to bring them to official notice. In others, gossip did the job more efficiently than any priest could. Punishments varied. A woman convicted of adultery might be paraded through the streets in a white shift, carrying a candle as a sign of penance. In some regions, she might have her head shaved, a visible mark of shame that would take months, even years, to fade. But here's the irony. Men guilty of the same offenses were often treated more leniently, or sins might be winked at, excused as natural weakness. A woman's failings, on the other hand, were seen as a threat to the moral fabric of society. And then there were cases where women used the courts to strike back. A wronged wife might sue her husband's mistress for damages, yes, that actually happened. In some towns, alienation of affection wasn't just a modern legal curiosity, but a recognized cause of action. If she could prove that the other woman had seduced her husband away, she might win compensation, though whether that money made up for the betrayal is another matter entirely. Justice in the Middle Ages was not blind, it saw gender, class, wealth, and influence very clearly. But in the spaces between the rules, women found room to maneuver. They learned when to push, when to plead, and when to let a matter drop. And while the law might have been written by men, women shaped how it was lived, case by case, day by day. Life in the Middle Ages was harsh, and every coin mattered. Women's labor was not just a side note. It was the engine keeping families, villages, and towns alive. While men often get the spotlight in history books for battles and politics, women were the backbone of the economy, quietly, relentlessly working in ways both visible and hidden. Imagine a bustling medieval village just after dawn. Smoke curls from chimneys, the market square stirs to life, and the first carts rattle over cobblestones. Women move through this scene carrying baskets, tending stalls, leading children by hand. Some have traveled from miles around with goods to sell. Others work in shops passed down through generations. In towns and cities, many women were artisans and traders. They baked bread that filled the streets with warmth and the smell of yeast. They wove cloth on simple looms, turning wool or flax into garments and blankets. They made soap, candles, and leather goods. Some brewed beer or ale work that required knowledge, patience, and a sense of timing honed through years. Guilds, those powerful medieval trade associations, often excluded women officially, yet women found ways in. So widows might inherit their husband's business and run it on their own. Daughters learned trades alongside fathers and brothers. In some places, women became full guild members, respected for their skill and honesty. They paid dues, obeyed rules, and competed fiercely in local markets. Even outside the formal guild system, women's work shaped economic life. Housewives and peasants sold excess eggs, butter, or vegetables. They mended clothes, embroidered linens, or bartered firewood for flour. In towns, market days were crucial events where women might negotiate the price of salt, wool, or spices. They learned to read subtle signs. Was the merchant honest? Was the grain fresh? Would the wool dye well? Economic life was a delicate dance of trust and toughness. One false step could mean hunger or ruin. A woman's reputation was everything. A fair trader built relationships that could last years, while a dishonest one quickly lost customers. Stories of cheating, both told and heard in whispers, spread fast and often shaped who prospered. Beyond trade, many women worked as servants in wealthier households. These jobs ranged from cooking and cleaning to sewing and childcare. Service work was demanding, sometimes brutal, but it also offered a way out of rural poverty and an opportunity to learn new skills. Some young women rose through the ranks, eventually becoming housekeepers or estate managers. For others, the path was shorter and harder. For noble women, the economic world looked different but was no less complex. Managing a great household was itself a full-time job, one of budgeting, staffing, feeding, and planning. Estates included fields, mills, bakeries, and sometimes even workshops. A noble lady might oversee dozens of servants, tenants, and tradespeople. She negotiated contracts, collected rents, and made sure the castle's coffers did not run dry. Some noble women were surprisingly shrewd businesswomen. They might lend money, invest in land, or arrange profitable marriages for their children. Their letters and account books, when they survive, show a sharp mind behind the embroidery and the silks. But this power was always balanced on a knife's edge, vulnerable to the whims of husbands, kings, and shifting alliances. In villages, peasant women's work was more directly tied to survival. Farming was the family's lifeblood, and women planted, weeded, harvested, and stored the crops. They cared for animals, churned butter, and preserved food through pickling or smoking. The day's work was long, stretching from before sunrise until after sunset, punctuated only by the needs of infants or the season's changing demands. Alongside farming, women spun wool and flax, made clothes, and repaired tools. Their hands were rarely still. From dawn to dusk, they moved in rhythms dictated by the land and the household, always balancing the immediate needs with future survival. They learned when to plant potatoes so the frost would not catch them, how to tell if a cow was sick, or when a baby's cry meant hunger or fever. And yet, despite this constant labor, women found moments of creativity and joy. Festivals brought music, dancing, and laughter. Even in poverty, celebrations marked the turning of seasons, weddings, and baptisms. Women sang songs passed down through generations, telling stories of heroes, saints, and ancient gods. They baked special breads, wore bright ribbons, and adorned themselves with wildflowers. Trade fairs and markets were vibrant centers of social life. There, women traded not only goods but news, gossip, and advice. They exchanged herbal remedies, recipes, and stories of hardship and hope. In these crowded, colorful spaces, the web of medieval community was woven tight and strong. All this work was more than mere survival. It was the pulse of medieval society. Women's labor underpinned feudal economies, shaped towns and villages, and preserved cultures. Their skill, strength, and resilience were the invisible threads holding the age together. So tonight, picture her again. The peasant woman at the market stall, wrapping fresh cheese in cloth, her face flushed from the morning's cold. The noble woman poring over account books by candlelight, planning the next season's harvest or a dowry. The young apprentice spinning wool, dreaming of the day she might run her own shop. Each woman, in her own way, weaving life's fabric through toil, trade, and tender care. Tomorrow, like today, there will be work to do. But for now, she rests. Let her sleep. Childhood in the Middle Ages was not the long, carefree stretch of play and schooling we might imagine today. Instead, it was a brief, fragile season framed by work, learning, and the ever-present shadow of mortality. Children were born into a world where every breath was precious, where infancy was perilous, and where growing up meant stepping into responsibility sooner than we would expect. From the moment a child entered the world, their survival depended on the careful hands of their mother, midwives, and the village community. The death rate was staggering. Some estimates suggest that nearly half of all children died before their 5th birthday. Illness, malnutrition, infection, and accidents claimed tiny lives without mercy. Those who survived did so thanks to a mix of care, instinct, and often luck. Imagine a newborn swaddled tightly in strips of linen or wool, lying beside its mother on a straw mattress. The woman hums soft lullabies, singing the child into calm, while outside, the village stirs to life. This closeness, the warmth of a mother's body, was life itself. Breastfeeding was the primary source of nutrition, often continuing for 2 or 3 years if possible. Wet nurses existed but were rare and generally reserved for the wealthy. Early childhood was a time of constant vigilance. Mothers watched for signs of illness, a fever, a cough, a pale complexion. They treated their children with herbal infusions, poultices, and prayers. Fennel water to soothe colic, chamomile to calm fever, and rue to protect from evil spirits. Medicine was as much faith as science. Sometimes a charm or a whispered blessing could be the difference between hope and despair. As children grew, their roles shifted swiftly from dependent infants to helpful members of the household. By age 3 or 4, children began imitating adults. Girls played with rag dolls made from scraps of cloth, learning the motions of motherhood and homemaking. Boys chased after chickens, carried small bundles of firewood, or helped with simple tasks like feeding animals. Formal education was a luxury. Most children never learned to read or write. Schooling was limited mostly to the sons of nobles or clergy, where Latin and theology might be taught by monks or private tutors. For the majority, learning was hands-on, passed down orally through stories, work, and example. Despite this, childhood was not without play or joy. Simple games, throwing stones, spinning tops, and tag were common. Festivals brought opportunities for dancing, music, and merriment, allowing children a brief respite from work. Family gatherings and communal events punctuated the rhythms of daily life with moments of laughter and connection. As children approached 7 or 8, their work became more serious. Girls helped their mothers with cooking, spinning, and sewing. They learned to garden, tend animals, and prepare food. Boys began learning trades, assisting fathers in farming, blacksmithing, or carpentry. By early adolescence, many children were fully integrated into the economic and social fabric of their families. Marriage and adulthood came early by modern standards. Girls could be betrothed as children, sometimes before they even reached puberty. Marriage was less about romance and more about alliances, property, and survival. A girl's future was often decided by her family's needs rather than her own desires. Yet even with these hardships, the bond between parent and child was deep and enduring. Mothers and fathers loved their children fiercely, mourned their losses painfully, and celebrated their growth joyfully. The home was a place of teaching, protection, and hope against the uncertainty of the world outside. So tonight, picture the child against mall hands, clutching a worn rag doll, eyes bright with curiosity despite the roughness of life. Imagine her resting beside the hearth, the faint smell of wood smoke and baking bread in the air. The day's lessons and chores set aside for a few quiet hours. Let her sleep now, safe in the gentle hold of her family's care. Tomorrow she will rise as children have for centuries, stepping lightly into the footsteps of those who came before. Carrying their stories and hopes forward, the rhythms of medieval childhood continued to unfold in ways both simple and profound. As the seasons turned, so too did the steps of a child's journey toward adulthood, marked not by years alone, but by milestones of survival, labor, and faith. In the earliest years, the home was a sanctuary, a place of safety, warmth, and instruction. Here, children learned the essentials of daily life, watching their mothers prepare food, mend clothes, and tend the hearth. They absorbed stories told in low voices by candlelight tales of saints, kings and heroes, mingled with local legends and warnings against sin. These stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons about the world, about how to behave, and about the invisible forces of fate and faith that shaped every life. By the age of 6 or 7, most children were expected to contribute. Girls would begin learning the skills of spinning, weaving, and sewing. The distaff and spindle were constant companions, tools of both necessity and identity. Boys would shadow their fathers or older brothers into fields, workshops, or markets. Learning a trade was as much about survival as it was about status. Good carpenter, blacksmith, or merchant could lift a family out of poverty. Poor worker might toil forever without reprieve. Education, where it existed, was often harsh and limited. For most, literacy was a distant dream, locked behind Latin prayers and dusty manuscripts in monasteries. But even among the poor, children learned their letters in rudimentary ways, perhaps with a chalkboard scratched on a plank or a pointed stick in the dirt. Those lucky enough to attend school did so under the watchful eye of stern clerics, who drilled lessons of the Psalms, prayers, and basic arithmetic. Play, though rare, was a treasured relief. Children played with what they had. Wooden toys carved by hands rough with work, rag dolls stitched from scraps, balls made of leather or cloth. Games of tag, hide and seek, and simple sports gave breath and laughter to a life otherwise full of toil. During festivals and holy days, the village might come alive with dancing, music, merrymaking, where children joined freely, momentarily released from their daily duties. One of the most poignant realities of childhood was the ever-present threat of death. Illnesses that today are minor could be deadly. Measles, smallpox, whooping cough. These diseases swept through villages with devastating speed. Parents clutched their children close during epidemics, praying fervently for their survival. Many families were left with empty cradles, the silence of loss echoing through the years. For those who reached adolescence, the world changed again. The transition from child to adult was swift and often brutal. Around the age of 12 or 14, young girls were prepared for marriage. Their bodies and minds shaped for a life of motherhood and household management. Boys took on more responsibility, preparing for trades, military service, or clerical roles. Marriage was a transaction as much as a rite. The bride's family negotiated dowries and alliances. The groom's family offered protection and provision. Love was a luxury, often absent from the arrangements made in castle halls or peasant cottages alike. Yet within this framework, young couples forged bonds, sometimes tender, sometimes strained, always complicated by the demands of their world. Rites of passage were marked with ceremony and superstition. The first menstruation was greeted with a mix of relief and anxiety, heralding a girl's readiness for marriage, but also marking her as vulnerable to spiritual dangers. Weddings were celebrations of union and obligation, parties where community ties were forged and futures set. Education about sex and marriage was scarce and filled with silence. Girls were warned to be obedient, to keep their bodies pure yet ready. Boys were given scant instruction beyond the assumption that they would take what they wanted. Myths and fears surrounded sexuality, feeding into church doctrines and village gossip alike. Despite these pressures, children, especially girls, found ways to learn, to resist, and to dream. They whispered secrets, exchanged herbal remedies, and passed down folk wisdom through generations. They formed friendships and alliances, sharing hopes and fears under the shade of ancient trees or beside quiet streams. In rare cases, some children broke free from tradition's grip. Foundlings abandoned at monastery gates, apprentices who ran away to seek new trades, girls who disguised themselves as boys to escape unwanted marriages. These stories, though exceptions, reveal the cracks in a rigid society, the flickers of individual will against collective expectation. As night falls once more, picture the child again. Perhaps a boy asleep with a wooden sword at his side, dreaming of battles and glory. Perhaps a girl clutching a simple doll, her thoughts already turning toward the life she will lead. Outside, the village rests under a sky of stars, the hum of life quieted but never gone. Let the child sleep now. Tomorrow will bring the dawn, and with it, the endless cycle of work, learning, hope, and survival that shaped every medieval life. For in their small hands the future was held fragile, uncertain, but fiercely alive. Education in the medieval world was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of faith, necessity, and social hierarchy. For most children, formal schooling was a privilege reserved for the sons of nobility or the few who found sanctuary in monasteries and convents. These institutions, cloistered away from the noise of daily toil, offered instruction in Latin, scripture, logic, and the rudiments of philosophy. Boys destined for priesthood or scholarly life spent years copying manuscripts, memorizing prayers, and debating theological questions, an existence of discipline and routine that contrasted sharply with the more physical education of their secular peers. For the vast majority, however, learning was rooted in practical skills, passed down from parent to child through observation and repetition. Mothers taught daughters to spin and weave, to tend gardens and hearths, to sow and preserve. Fathers guided sons in wielding tools, understanding the land, or practicing the rudiments of trade. This apprenticeship model was immersive and unrelenting, as children were expected to contribute meaningfully to family survival from a very young age. Religious instruction, meanwhile, permeated every corner of childhood. Sunday Mass was a weekly anchor. Holy days brought feast and fast, processions and pageants. Through ritual and story, children absorbed the moral codes and cosmic order that governed medieval life. They learned to fear sin and death, to aspire toward salvation, and to respect the authority of the church and the king, seen as God's earthly representative. Yet this religious education was not without contradictions. Many rural families clung to older folk traditions, superstitions, charms, and remedies, whispered from grandmother to grandchild alongside formal prayers. Children heard tales of saints and miracles, but also of witches and spirits lurking in the dark woods. These stories shaped their understanding of the unseen world, a place where holy and profane forces mingled invisibly. As children grew into teenagers, the pressure to conform to adult roles intensified. Girls were prepared for the demands of marriage and motherhood with lessons in chastity, obedience, and household management. They learned to cook over open fires, to spin fine thread, to mend clothing with care and patience. The arrival of their first menses was often met with a mixture of celebration and solemnity, signaling a transformation both physical and social. Boys, on the other hand, faced a choice shaped by family station and opportunity. Some entered trades as apprentices, bound to masters who taught them the secrets of craft and commerce in exchange for years of labor and loyalty. Others joined households as pages or squires, learning the arts of war, chivalry, and courtly manners in preparation for knighthood. A rare few pursued scholarly paths or the clergy, while many simply prepared to inherit their family's land and responsibilities. This passage from childhood to adulthood was neither smooth nor guaranteed. Many never lived to reach their teenage years, lost to disease, famine, or violence. Those who survived faced a world harsh and demanding, where personal dreams often bowed beneath communal needs. Marriage, a central turning point, was both a personal and political act. It bound families, secured alliances, and ensured the continuation of lineage. Dowries, money, land, or goods brought by the bride were carefully negotiated assets, crucial to the match's success. Weddings were community affairs, celebrations mingled with prayers, feasts, and dancing, but also solemn oaths and legal contracts. Young brides entered their new homes often unprepared for the realities of childbirth, household management, and the expectations placed upon them. Their lives were closely monitored, their behavior regulated by church law and social custom. Obedience to husband, care of children, and maintenance of household order were non-negotiable duties. Yet within these confines, women found ways to assert influence through managing estates, guiding children, or engaging in local trade and charity. For young men, the transition brought its own burdens. They assumed roles as heads of households, warriors, laborers, or merchants. Their honor and status depended on their ability to provide, protect, and uphold family name. Many learned early the brutal realities of medieval justice, warfare, and political intrigue. Some sought glory on distant battlefields, others toiled in fields or workshops. Their aspirations often shaped by necessity rather than choice. Despite the weight of expectation, youth also held moments of joy and freedom. Festivals and holy days broke the endless cycle of work, allowing music, dance, and games. Courts and markets were places of meeting and negotiation, where young people glimpsed lives beyond their own. Friendships, first loves, and secret conversations blossomed in the quiet corners of villages and towns. Through it all, the medieval child and youth lived in a world governed by the steady march of time and seasons, by faith and duty, by pain and hope. Their journey was shaped not by individual desire alone, but by the intricate weave of family, community, and divine order. The medieval calendar was marked not just by the turning of the sun and the passing of harvests, but by a mosaic of religious feasts and holy days that punctuated the year with moments of communal gathering, solemnity, and celebration. These occasions offered a brief but vital break from the relentless cycle of labor. It's a time when the village or town could breathe, when the burdens of survival eased, and when stories, music, and prayer intertwined to nourish both body and soul. At the heart of this rhythm was the church, the towering stone sanctuary that rose above every settlement, its bells calling the faithful to worship and to mark the passing of hours and seasons. Life was deeply intertwined with Christian belief. Every birth, marriage, and death was framed by ritual. Every success and failure interpreted through the lens of divine will. Christmas was a shining beacon in the cold darkness of winter, a festival of light, hope, and renewal. Preparations began days in advance, cleaning the house, baking special breads studded with dried fruit and spices, weaving wreaths of holly and ivy to hang on doors and windows. On Christmas Eve, families gathered in the church, the flicker of candles reflecting in stained glass, voices lifted in the ancient carols that told the story of the Nativity. Afterwards, there might be feasting music, the sharing of small gifts, luxuries in a world often stripped to bare essentials. Easter was the most solemn and joyous of feasts, celebrating resurrection and rebirth. It marked the end of Lent, the 40 days of fasting and penitence, a time when rich foods and pleasures were set aside to prepare the body and soul for the great celebration. The arrival of spring mirrored the spiritual awakening. As fields greened, lambs were born, and hope blossomed anew. Easter Sunday brought church bells ringing, processions winding through streets, and feasts that often included fresh eggs, symbolizing new life. But there were countless other days, lesser known yet deeply meaningful. The feast days of local saints, the harvest festivals, the days dedicated to the Virgin Mary, or to patron saints who watched over trades, villages, or noble houses. Each had its own customs: processions carrying statues, the lighting of bonfires, the telling of stories passed down through generations, dances that wove together joy and reverence. In many villages, the communal nature of these celebrations strengthened bonds between neighbors. Old rivalries softened, laughter filled the air, and for a time, the hardships of everyday life were held at bay. Music, often played on simple instruments like the fiddle, lute, or wooden flute, echoed through great halls and open fields alike. Dancers circled, hand in hand, as the flickering torches cast long shadows against stone walls. Yet, even in festivity, reminders of mortality were never far. The medieval mind was acutely aware of life's fragility, the ever-present shadow of death. The dance of death, or danse macabre, was a popular motif. A reminder that death claimed all, noble and peasant alike. Art, sermons, and plays reinforced this theme, urging humility, piety, in preparation for the hereafter. Pilgrimages were another vital part of medieval spirituality and social life. To travel on foot or horseback to distant shrines or holy sites was both a test of faith and a chance for adventure. Pilgrims carried badges, tokens of their journey, and often returned with stories that spread through towns and villages like wildfire. These journeys could take weeks or months, fraught with peril, but offered a glimpse beyond the familiar world. A brush with the sacred that was transformative. For noble families, religious observance was often entwined with status and politics. Patronage of abbeys, funding of elaborate masses, and the commissioning of lavish religious art displayed both piety and power. Yet even for those in high places, personal faith was deeply felt. A source of comfort and fear, hope and doubt. Within monasteries and convents, where we paused earlier, the cycle of prayer punctuated each day, a spiritual echo of the physical labors of the outside world. The hours of chanting psalms and scripture, the silent contemplation, and the manual work created a life of discipline and devotion. Some nuns and monks produced magnificent illuminated manuscripts, preserving knowledge and beauty amid the turbulence of their age. But not all medieval spirituality was strictly orthodox. Folk beliefs, superstitions, and local customs mingled with church doctrine in a complex tapestry. People carried charms against the evil eye, sought the counsel of wise women, and observed rituals that blurred the line between religion and magic. The church often condemned these practices, but they persisted, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Imagine now the village on a feast day. Smoke rises from ovens baking sweet cakes and spiced breads. Children run with ribbons tied to their wrists, laughter spilling over cobblestones. The church bells toll a slow, sonorous call to Mass. Inside, the priest's voice rises in solemn chant as sunlight filters through stained glass, illuminating faces young and old. Outside, merchants sell trinkets and alewives offer mugs of sweet-smelling small beer. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meat, fresh hay, and wildflowers. Music floats on the breeze, and dancers weave patterns under the open sky. This moment, life is both fragile and full. Joy and sorrow, faith and doubt, toil and rest, all mingle in the quiet pulse of the Middle Ages. Let this image settle in your mind as the day draws to a close. The candles gutter low, the last songs fade, and the village settles into night. Tomorrow, the grind of work will resume, but tonight, the world holds its breath, cradled in the gentle hands of tradition and hope. A child's life in the Middle Ages was woven tightly into the rhythms of family and community, marked by hardship and hope in equal measure. From the moment of birth, survival was never guaranteed. Infant mortality was high. Many children did not live past their first year. Mothers nursed with devotion, whispering lullabies and stories handed down through generations, but sickness and famine often whispered louder. When a child did survive, their earliest years were a blend of play and preparation. There were no schools for most. Education happened at home or in the fields. Boys learned by watching their fathers and uncles, following the slow, steady work of planting, herding, and crafting. Girls shadowed their mothers, imitating the endless tasks of cooking, spinning, and caring for younger siblings. Toys were simple: rag dolls, wooden swords, carved animals, but they carried the weight of lessons and imagination. Children learned through stories told by the fire, stories of saints, of heroes, of the wonders and terrors that shaped their world. These tales grounded them in belief and prepared them for a life where faith and fate were closely intertwined. In some towns and monasteries, boys might attend rudimentary schools run by priests or monks. Learning to read Latin and study scripture, girls' education was rarer, mostly confined to those in noble families or convents, where some nuns taught reading, writing, and even music. But for the vast majority, literacy was a distant dream, replaced by practical knowledge and oral tradition. As children grew, their roles shifted from play to responsibility. By the age of 5 or 6, they were expected to contribute, carrying water, gathering firewood, tending animals. Work and play blended seamlessly. There was no clear boundary between childhood and adulthood, just a gradual unfolding of duties. For noble children, life followed a different though equally demanding path. Boys might be sent away as pages to serve in other noble households, learning the arts of combat, horsemanship, and courtly manners. Girls were groomed for marriage, taught embroidery, music, and the social graces required to navigate alliances and estates. But all children shared the constant presence of faith. Baptism was more than a ceremony. It was the key to salvation, a promise of eternal life. Throughout their short lives, children attended church services, learned prayers, and took part in festivals that marked the passage of time and the cycle of seasons. Childhood was also shadowed by fear. Disease could sweep through villages like a silent storm. Parents lived with the knowledge that a single cough or fever could mean tragedy. Medicine was a mixture of folk remedies, prayers, and superstition. Mothers carried knowledge of herbs and incantations, passed quietly from one generation to the next, always hoping to protect their precious little ones. Death was a constant companion. The loss of a child was mourned deeply, yet life's demands required that grief be folded into daily survival. Graves were simple, often unmarked, with crosses or small stones to mark the resting place. The hope of heaven offered some comfort, but the earthly ache remained. Imagine a child on a crisp autumn morning. The air smells of damp leaves and smoke from hearth fires. Their breath forms small clouds as they run barefoot across the village green, laughter echoing among the stone cottages. Their mother calls from the doorway, her hands busy, but her eyes watching with quiet love. The child pauses to pick a fallen acorn, holds it carefully, and then runs on, ready to face another day in a world that is as beautiful as it is unforgiving. The story of medieval childhood is one of resilience, of learning and growing amid hardship. It is a story often whispered in the shadows of castles and cathedrals, but it is the foundation on which the centuries were built. In the medieval period, justice was not a single, unified system as we might imagine today. Instead, it was a patchwork of overlapping courts, authorities, and customs. Royal courts, ecclesiastical courts, and town guild courts, each with its own rules and reach. For ordinary people, especially women, justice was often elusive, partial, and deeply influenced by social status, gender, and local power. The law was primarily designed to maintain order and protect property, especially that of the wealthy and powerful. Women, particularly married women, were rarely seen as full legal persons. Instead, their rights were filtered through fathers, husbands, or guardians. Before marriage, a girl belonged legally to her father. Upon marriage, she was covered or legally subsumed under her husband's identity. This meant she could not own property independently, sign contracts, or sue or be sued without her husband's involvement. Widows were an exception, though a fragile one. They could inherit property, run businesses, and represent themselves in court. But their rights were always conditional. They had to defend their claims against sons, brothers, or ambitious lords who might seek to reclaim or control what they viewed as family assets. Village courts were the first line of justice for many. Here, local disputes were heard over fences, theft, debts, or accusations of scolding neighbors. These courts were informal, community-based, and often presided over by the local lord or his steward. Women might appear in court to defend themselves, accuse others, or testify. But the outcomes often hinged on reputation, alliances, and sometimes sheer force of personality. So tonight, picture a young girl stitching by the firelight, her hands steady, despite the weariness in her eyes. Imagine a boy running through the fields, chasing a dream of honor, whispered by a father's voice. Hear the distant laughter of children playing as the stars wheel overhead, ancient and unchanging. Let them rest now, their futures uncertain, but their spirits quietly enduring. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new lessons, and the continuing story of lives lived in the shadow of history's grand and grinding wheel. Adulthood in the Middle Ages was a realm of hard realities tempered by quiet joys, where the weight of responsibility settled heavily on shoulders still shaped by youthful dreams. Once a child crossed into adulthood, a transition marked by marriage, apprenticeship completion, or the inheritance of land. Their role in the social order became fixed and often unforgiving. Marriage, the pivotal rite of passage for most, was rarely about love as we understand it today. It was a contract, a bond forged between families, with the future carefully negotiated by fathers, mothers, and sometimes lords or kings. The bride was usually young, often between 12 and 14 years old, barely a child herself. Thrust into a new world where she was expected to bear children, manage a household, and secure her family's standing. For noble families, marriages could alter the course of history. A well-placed bride could bring alliances, peace, or claims to lands far away. Dowries were significant investments, the wealth of a family transferred to secure a daughter's future. A noblewoman might bring fine linens, silverware, cattle, or even entire parcels of land as part of her marriage portion. These riches were carefully catalogued, and their management would often fall to the new lady of the household. Yet, behind the velvet curtains and polished halls, the demands on a noblewoman were exacting. She supervised servants and stewards, educated children, managed finances, and upheld family honor. The reputation of her lineage depended largely on her ability to produce heirs and maintain decorum. Her days were filled with endless detail, choosing garments, planning meals, overseeing needlework, and navigating the labyrinth of courtly etiquette. A misstep could damage not just her standing, but that of her husband and his family. In contrast, the life of a peasant woman was shaped by the cyclical rhythm of survival. Her marriage was more pragmatic, a partnership forged in necessity. Love was a luxury, often unattainable, and marriages could be arranged by families seeking to secure labor, land, or alliances within the village. Dowries were modest, perhaps a few hens, a woolen cloak, or a tool for the fields, but no less important in binding families together. Once married, the peasant woman faced unrelenting labor. Her days began long before dawn and ended only after darkness had fallen. She bore children in cramped, drafty cottages, often alone or with the assistance of a local midwife. Infant mortality was a constant sorrow, with half or more of children failing to reach their 5th birthday. Yet each surviving child was a small triumph, a hope for the family's future. Household management was a full-time endeavor. Women cooked over smoky fires, tended gardens, spun thread, wove cloth, washed clothes in cold streams, and preserved food for the harsh winters. They cared for the sick and elderly, patched clothing and mended tools. Their expertise was practical, born of necessity and passed down through generations. Unlike noble women, whose days were punctuated by ceremonial duties, peasant women were inseparable from the physical work that kept their families alive. Men, too, faced demanding roles. A peasant man labored in fields, plowed, sowed, harvested, and repaired fences. His strength was vital, but so was his knowledge of the land and seasons. He was expected to protect his family, pay dues to his lord, and fulfill days of labor on the manor. Failure to meet these obligations risked fines or eviction. In towns and cities, adulthood took different shapes. The burgeoning middle class of merchants, craftsmen, and traders offered some flexibility. A young man might apprentice in a guild, learning skills like weaving, blacksmithing, or baking. Successful artisans could rise to own shops, employ others, and influence local governance. Women here often worked alongside their husbands, running stalls, brewing ale, or sewing garments for sale. Some widows inherited their husbands' businesses, maintaining livelihoods and reputations in bustling urban markets. Yet even in towns, laws and customs curtailed women's independence. Legal status often remained tied to male relatives. Women's voices in guilds were muted or conditional. Social mobility was rare, and economic success could be precarious. Family life was a complex web of duty, affection, and survival. Households often included extended kin, grandparents, unmarried siblings, or distant cousins. Relationships were shaped by proximity, obligation, and mutual dependence. Disputes over land, inheritance, or behavior could strain ties. But so too could shared joys like festivals, weddings, and communal feasts. Religious belief was a constant backdrop. Baptisms, marriages, funerals, all marked transitions with rituals blending hope and fear. The church's calendar structured time, and saints' days brought moments of respite from toil. Pilgrimages and prayers offered solace and a sense of connection to a larger spiritual world. The shadow of mortality loomed large, as plagues, famines, wars, and accidents were ever-present threats. Families mourned frequently, burying infants, spouses, siblings. Yet amid grief, life persisted. New children were born, crops replanted, homes repaired. The cycle turned, relentless and unyielding. For women in particular, this life was often defined by a delicate balance of endurance and agency. While laws and customs constrained their freedoms, women carved out spaces of influence, managing households, guiding children, negotiating local disputes, and participating in markets and crafts. Their labor was the backbone of medieval society, their resilience a quiet force that shaped generations. Tonight, imagine a medieval family gathered around a flickering fire, scent of wood smoke mingling with the faint aroma of herbs. The mother mends a child's torn garment, her fingers nimble despite the cold. The father sharpens a tool, his face lined with fatigue, but softened by the presence of kin. Children play quietly, shadows dancing on stone walls. Outside, the night deepens, stars wheeling overhead. Let them rest in this fleeting peace, for tomorrow, dawn will bring the same toil, the same hopes, the same unspoken love that sustains life through hardship. Childbirth was a defining moment, a mixture of hope, fear, and endurance that marked the passage from one generation to the next. For medieval women, childbirth was both a sacred duty and a profound trial. Without the benefit of modern medicine, every birth carried risk. Midwives were essential figures, women who carried generations of knowledge about herbs, positions for labor, and rituals to protect mother and child. These wise women might be neighbors, relatives, or respected members of the village. Their skills vital in times when doctors were rare and often unreachable. Labor could last hours or days, attended by prayer, songs, and hands skilled in soothing pain. The room where birth occurred was often simple: a low bed, straw-stuffed mattresses, flickering candles, and the murmur of anxious family nearby. Birth was perilous. Many mothers never survived their labors. Many infants were stillborn or died soon after. The fear was ever present, a shadow that stretched over every pregnant woman. When a child was born, it was immediately baptized, a ritual believed to protect the soul from damnation and evil spirits. Baptism was urgent because infant mortality was so high. Those who survived infancy were blessings, and each child represented hope for the family's future. Workers, caregivers, and bearers of the family name. Raising children was a communal endeavor. Older siblings often cared for younger ones, while mothers and grandmothers passed on knowledge of cooking, sewing, and prayer. Education for most was informal and practical, rooted in daily tasks rather than books. For noble children, tutors might teach Latin, music, and etiquette, preparing boys for knighthood and girls for courtly life. But for most, learning meant watching, helping, and absorbing the rhythm of village life. Health was fragile. Disease lurked everywhere, often misunderstood and feared. Fevers, infections, and parasites were common. Herbal remedies were the first line of defense. Infusions of chamomile, willow bark for pain, poultices of onion or garlic. The church encouraged prayer and confession as spiritual remedies, while folk beliefs mingled with Christian rites to protect against evil spirits or curses. The Black Death, which would later devastate Europe, was still centuries away, but plagues and famines were familiar threats. When sickness came, entire families suffered. Care fell largely on women, midwives, healers, and nurses, who worked tirelessly to ease suffering with limited means. The family was also a unit of economic survival. Every member contributed to household tasks. Children gathered firewood, tended animals, or helped in fields. Men hunted, repaired buildings, and worked outside the home. Women prepared food, spun thread, cleaned, and maintained the household. Their combined labor sustained the fragile balance between scarcity and plenty. Social obligations extended beyond the family. Neighbors relied on one another for help during harvest, building, or crisis. Feasts, fairs, and festivals punctuated the year. Moments of celebration were music. Dance and shared food offered relief from daily hardships. These gatherings reinforced bonds, allowed for courtship, and offered a glimpse of joy in an often difficult world. For nobles, social life revolved around court and land management. Lords and ladies hosted elaborate feasts, entertained visiting dignitaries, and engaged in political maneuvering. Marriage alliances, patronage, and displays of wealth were tools of power. Yet beneath the grandeur, pressures to produce heirs, manage estates, and maintain honor weighed heavily. Meanwhile, peasants navigated their own complex world of obligations to their lord, to the church, to neighbors, and to the land. Festivals such as Michaelmas or Candlemas marked agricultural cycles and religious observances, offering brief respite. But even celebrations required labor. Baking special breads, preparing meats, brewing ale, or weaving new clothes. In the shadows of these daily lives, stories of love, loss, hope, and endurance unfolded. Children laughing despite hunger, mothers grieving lost infants, couples whispering promises by firelight, elders sharing wisdom as winter winds howled outside. These moments, quiet and often invisible to history, were the true heartbeat of the Middle Ages. Imagine now a peasant family at the close of a long day. The sun has dipped behind distant hills. Smoke rises in lazy spirals from the hearth. The mother rocks a baby to sleep. The father mends a broken tool. The children settle by the fire, faces glowing in the firelight. Outside, the world is still, but never silent. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the notion of a woman as a common scold was a uniquely gendered offense. It described a woman who was seen as disruptive, gossiping too much, quarreling loudly, or challenging social norms. Punishments were public and humiliating: ducking stools, metal muzzles, or fines. These punishments aimed to silence women who stepped outside the bounds of expected behavior. Serious crimes like theft, assault, or even murder were tried in higher courts. Women accused of such crimes faced harsh penalties, sometimes even death, yet courts often judged character. And women known for piety and obedience might receive leniency, while those seen as proud or troublesome faced suspicion and punishment. Ecclesiastical courts handled moral offenses: adultery, fornication, slander, heresy, matters seen as sins against God and community. These courts could impose public penance, fines, or excommunication. A woman bearing an illegitimate child might be forced to confess publicly, endure shame, or perform humiliating acts before her community. Such punishments could ruin reputations, affecting marriage prospects and social standing for years. Witchcraft accusations grew in frequency from the 14th century onward. What began as suspicion of folk magic evolved into a dangerous conflation with heresy and devil worship, especially targeting women, midwives, healers, widows, or anyone who seemed different or threatening. Trials were often brutal, relying on torture or forced confessions. Many innocent women suffered, their lives shattered by fear and superstition. Yet women were not only victims, they participated actively in justice, bringing lawsuits over property disputes, debts, or broken promises, acting as witnesses, and sometimes holding positions of authority, especially as widows managing estates or businesses. In towns, women belonged to guilds, took apprentices, paid taxes, and enforced guild rules. Their legal standing was a complex dance between limitations and opportunity. Justice was uneven, shaped by class, gender, and circumstance. But women learned how to navigate its currents. They knew when to plead ignorance, when to argue fiercely, when to appeal to a sympathetic priest or lord. Their survival often depended on their knowledge of people, places, and laws. Knowledge passed through whispered conversations, hard-earned experience, and sharp instincts. Imagine a woman standing before a crowded village court. Her heart pounds as neighbors watch as accusations and defenses unfold. She speaks clearly, drawing on memories and alliances, fighting for her rights or seeking justice for a wrong. The judge listens, the steward nods, and the crowd murmurs. What verdict will come? The law is never certain, but she is determined. Medieval towns were lively places, surrounded by stone walls that marked a boundary between the agricultural countryside and a growing sphere of trade and industry. Here, markets thrived beneath timber-framed houses with overhanging upper stories, and narrow lanes echoed with the calls of merchants, the clatter of carts, and the chatter of townsfolk. Unlike the rigid hierarchy of feudal villages, towns offered a different rhythm of life, one shaped by guilds, charters, and the push and pull of opportunity. A typical day in the life of a medieval artisan began long before dawn, in workshops that smelled of wood shavings, tanned leather, or molten metal. The shoemaker or cordwainer sharpened tools and prepared hides. The blacksmith struck glowing iron on an anvil. The weaver wove threads on a loom, fingers flying with practiced precision. Each craft required years of apprenticeship and mastery, passed from master to journeyman to apprentice, a lineage of knowledge and skill. Guilds formed the backbone of this world. These associations regulated trades, maintained quality, controlled prices, and protected their members. Entry was tightly controlled. Apprentices learned the craft for years before becoming journeymen, and only then might they produce a masterpiece to gain full membership. Guilds also offered social support, care for widows and orphans, and organized religious festivals and processions that punctuated the calendar with color and celebration. Women's roles in the medieval town economy were complex and varied. Though many crafts were dominated by men, women found niches as seamstresses, brewers, bakers, and sellers. Widows could inherit their husbands' businesses and maintain shops or workshops, sometimes becoming formidable entrepreneurs in their own right. Some women operated stalls in the market, selling everything from cloth and spices to pottery and herbal remedies. Their knowledge was essential to the daily functioning of the town. The market was a cacophony of sights and sounds. Vendors hawked fresh produce, salted fish, cured meats, and baked bread. The smell of spices, cinnamon, cloves, pepper wafted through the air, brought from distant lands by merchant caravans. Bartering was common, and money exchanged hands in silver pennies or gold florins. But trust and reputation mattered just as much as coins. Trade brought wealth to some and ruin to others. Merchants dealt with risks, bandits on roads, unpredictable markets, and strict tolls at city gates. Yet trade was also a conduit of culture. Exotic goods, new ideas, fashions, and technologies flowed along trade routes, knitting distant lands into a medieval global network. Townsfolk might marvel at silk from Byzantium or spices from the Levant, but their daily meals were simple bread, cheese, onions, and perhaps a small piece of salted pork. Life in towns was not just about work. It was about community. People gathered in taverns where ale flowed freely and stories were exchanged by firelight. Festivals marked saints, days, and seasonal changes with dancing, music, and theatrical pageants that brought respite from daily toil. The church stood at the heart of the town, a place of worship, refuge, and social gathering. Yet towns were also places of tension. Crowded streets bred disease and conflict. Fire was a constant threat. Timber houses stood close, and open hearths were common. Guild rivalries, disputes over markets or property, and social inequalities could erupt into violence. The wealthy burghers lived differently from the poor laborers and beggars, and justice was often swift and harsh. Consider the story of a young apprentice named Thomas who arrived in town with dreams of becoming a master mason. His days were filled with heavy stones, sharp chisels, and lessons from his stern master. At night, he slept in a crowded dormitory with other apprentices. Listening to tales of cathedrals and castles being built far away, Thomas learned not just to carve stone, but to navigate the complex world of town life, the markets, the guild, meetings, the church festivals. His journey was one of labor, learning, and hope. Meanwhile, a widow named Marjorie ran her late husband's bakery with quiet determination. She rose before dawn to knead dough and tend the oven's fire. Her bread fed the town's laborers and merchants alike. Though her social standing was modest, Marjorie commanded respect for her skill and reliability. Her shop was a hub of news and gossip, where neighbors gathered to exchange information. Alliances were formed and community bonds were reinforced. The lives of townsfolk were shaped by rhythms different from peasants or nobles. Here, the seasons mattered less than the cycles of market days, fairs, and guild activities. Here, knowledge of contracts, debts, and the law could mean survival. Here, fortunes could be made or lost. And a sharp mind was as valuable as a strong arm. So tonight, imagine the warm glow of candlelight in a cramped workshop. The soft sound of a spinning wheel mingles with distant laughter from the tavern. Outside, the streets are quiet, but life hums just beneath the surface plans, made dreams nurtured. in the enduring pulse of a community that built the medieval world, stone by stone, stitch by stitch, day by day. As the first faint streaks of dawn stretch pale fingers across the eastern sky, the medieval town stirs slowly awake, like a great, groaning beast rousing from slumber. The air is cool, tinged with the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Narrow cobblestone streets, still slick with night's dew, glisten faintly under flickering lanterns hung outside shuttered windows. Above the roofed houses, the half-timbered facades loom, their wooden beams dark and rough, the plaster between them cracked from seasons of wind and rain. From somewhere deep within the twisting alleys, a rooster announces the coming day with a sharp, persistent crow, soon joined by a chorus of barking dogs, the clatter of carts, and the muffled voices of early risers. Town criers, their bell ringing shrill in the chill morning, begin their rounds, shouting news of market days, proclamations from the Lord, or warnings of taxes due. The rhythm of the day sets itself inexorable and unyielding. At the heart of the town is the bustling market square, an open space surrounded by shops, taverns, and the stone-faced church that towers like a silent sentinel. Here the smell of freshly baked bread mingles with the pungent aroma of tanned leather and the sweet, sharp tang of crushed herbs. By daybreak, wooden stalls are raised. Rough-hewn tables draped with linen cloth set with wares colorful bolts of cloth, earthenware pots, fragrant spices in small sacks, strings of dried herbs and baskets brimming with fresh vegetables, eggs, and fruits when in season. The people of the town move with purpose, but without haste, each step measured. The cobbler's apprentice wipes sweat from his brow as he pulls a newly stitched leather shoe from the last. The blacksmith pounds heated iron on his anvil, sparks flying with every blow, echoing through the narrow streets. The baker tends his wood-fired oven, kneading heavy dough that will feed dozens of hungry mouths before sunset. Women sweep doorways, their hands calloused but deft. Children chase one another between stalls, laughter ringing out above the general hum. This town is alive with craft and commerce, yet it is far from easy. Every penny earned must be balanced against the cost of food, tools, and rent for the cramped room above the workshop. Illness lurks unseen. Damp cellars and crowded homes provide perfect breeding grounds for disease. Fires rage unpredictably, devouring wooden houses in a matter of hours. But despite hardship, the townsfolk carry on, bound by necessity and hope. Consider Marjorie, the widow baker, who has run her late husband's shop for 3 winters now. She rises before the sun, pulling on a heavy woolen cloak and wrapping a coarse linen kerchief around her hair to keep stray strands from falling into the bread. In the flickering light of a tallow candle, she stokes the oven's dying embers, coaxing them into a fierce blaze. Her hands are rough and cracked from years of kneading dough, yet her movements are sure and practiced. Marjorie knows every lump and air bubble in the bread before it even emerges from the oven, her nose telling her if the crust is right or if the loaf needs longer to bake. Her bakery is a hub not just for food, but for news. The market women gather their early voices low with gossip and concerns. Who's taken ill? Which lord demands more taxes? A mysterious traveler spotted on the road. Marjorie listens with quiet patience, offering advice when asked, but mostly providing a warm smile and fresh bread. She is a linchpin of her community, a steady presence in a world that can feel unsteady. Nearby, young Thomas, an apprentice mason, struggles with a particularly stubborn block of limestone. The master mason watches from the shade, arms crossed, occasionally offering a sharp word or a nod of approval. Thomas is learning not just to carve stone, but to read the subtle signs of weather and where that will determine the fate of great cathedrals and city walls. He dreams of the day he will be granted his freedom, his master's approval, and the right to call himself a master mason, with his own workshop and apprentices. For now, the weight of his hammer and chisel is both his burden and his promise. Women in the town weave themselves into this tapestry of life in quiet but essential ways. Seamstresses mend clothes by candlelight, their needles catching the glint of worn fabric as they patch torn tunics and dresses. Alewives brew their small beer in smoky kitchens, balancing herbs and barley in simmering cauldrons. Their reputation hinges on the quality of their brew. Too weak and the town mocks them, too strong and the church frowns. Each batch is a careful act of alchemy, blending tradition and instinct. In the marketplace, merchants haggle fiercely. A spice trader from the Levant lifts a small bag of peppercorns with pride, extolling its rarity and exotic flavor to a cautious housewife buying for her family's modest kitchen. Cloth sellers unwrap rolls of dyed wool, showing deep reds and soft blues colors that can transform a plain dress into something striking, if the purse allows. Children dart between stalls, their bare feet slapping against stone, eyes wide with wonder at the colors, smells, and noises that fill the square. Guild halls, often modest stone buildings tucked between shops, are centers of power and social life. Here, craftsmen gather to debate standards, settle disputes, and celebrate saints' days. Guild membership is coveted. It grants protection, training, and sometimes even political influence. To be accepted is to be part of a brotherhood or sisterhood that can provide safety and opportunity in a sometimes cruel world. But town life is not all work and industry. Festivals and holy days bring respite and joy, a chance to forget burdens and dance in the streets. On these days, the market square fills with musicians playing fiddles and flutes, jugglers tossing pins high into the air, and children chasing one another with painted faces. Yet the smell of roasted meats and sweet cakes fills the air as neighbors share food and stories. Even the most hardened laborer lets down his guard, smiling and singing as lanterns glow against the darkening sky. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmer. The narrow streets and crowded homes breed disputes over property boundaries, unpaid debts, or insults exchanged in the market. The town constable is ever vigilant, his wooden club a warning as much as a weapon. Justice is swift and public. A thief might be flogged in the square, a scold ducked in the village pond, a heretic burned at the stake beyond the walls. Fear and rumor often spread as fast as laughter. Through all this, the people of the townmen, women, children live lives shaped by resilience, community, and the ever-present hope for a better tomorrow. They are the beating heart of the medieval world, bridging the gap between the sprawling rural estates and the distant, lofty courts of kings and lords. So tonight, as you imagine this ancient town settling into sleep, picture Marjorie wiping flour from her hands and closing the bakery door, Thomas laying down his hammer with a tired but hopeful sigh, the market stalls bathed in moonlight, silent but ready for the coming dawn. Hear the soft murmur of prayers drifting from the church, the whisper of leaves stirred by a gentle night breeze, the distant bark of a dog alerting the quiet streets. Let the town rest. Tomorrow, the bells will ring again, the forge will roar to life, and the wheels of craft and trade will turn once more. But for now, let peace settle like a soft blanket over cobblestones and thatched roofs, over lives lived in hard work, simple joys, and unyielding hope. Let them sleep. They have earned it. Spring tiptoes into the town. The chill of winter slowly loosens its grip. The fields beyond the walls begin to glisten with fresh green shoots, and the air is heavy with the scent of damp soil and blooming wildflowers. The sound of water gurgling through wooden gutters blends with the cries of newborn lambs in nearby pastures. Spring is a time of renewal and preparation, a frenetic season of planting and planting, of hope sown deep into the earth. For the townsfolk, it means more than just turning soil. It is a rebirth of purpose, a promise that sustenance will come if the work is done well. Marjorie, our steadfast baker, feels the shift keenly. Flour sacks stored through winter are running low, and fresh grain must be procured from the mills beyond the town gates. She rises earlier now, stoking the fire while shadows still stretch long and dark. Today, she plans to prepare seed bread, dense loaves baked with barley and rye, handed out to poorer families who cannot afford regular purchases. It is an act of charity, but also a gesture of communal solidarity, one that Marjorie embraces with pride. Meanwhile, Thomas, the apprentice mason, follows the rhythm of the seasons as well. The spring thaw reveals cracks in the church walls, a reminder that even stone ages and weakens with time. He works alongside his master to patch the mortar, his hands learning the delicate balance between strength and grace. The cathedral is not just a building, it is the town's heart, a place where prayers and hopes rise like incense to the heavens. Every chip of stone he shapes carries the weight of faith and history. In the marketplace, life quickens. Stalls display fresh herbs, parsley, sage, rosemary grown. In cramped garden plots behind homes, or tended carefully in pots by widow women who know their curative power. Children chase one another near the fountain, faces flushed with excitement and the smell of freshly churned mud beneath their feet. A stranger arrives this morning, cloaked and silent, carrying a small leather satchel. He is a traveling healer, one of the few who mix old knowledge with new, gathering herbs from forest and field, offering poultices for wounds and tinctures for fever.
Ow.
People watch him with wary eyes. Trust is hard won, and rumors swirl like smoke. Some whisper that he speaks to spirits, others that he is a charlatan. But when the smith's young son falls ill with a fever that no common remedy will touch, the healer's potions are a last hope. Seeds are carefully tucked into furrows, blessed with whispered prayers for rain and sunlight. The work is hard and unending, but there is a quiet satisfaction in watching life sprout from dirt, a reminder that the future is theirs to shape. Mothers teach daughters how to tend the soil, how to recognize the signs of pests or blight, how to harvest at just the right moment. It is knowledge passed from one generation to the next like a sacred heirloom. Yet spring also brings fragility. The thaw turned streets to mud, making travel treacherous. Water pools and low spots, a breeding ground for illness. Children catch colds easily, and midwives hurry from home to home, their baskets heavy with herbs and bandages. The town's sick room, little more than a crowded room above the baker's shop, fills quickly with those too weak to tend themselves. Nuns from the nearby convent come bearing broth and prayers, their faces tired but resolute. In this season of growth and risk, stories bloom as well whispers of secret loves exchanged beneath blossoming trees. Promises made in the cool shadow of the church's cloister, and rivalries simmering beneath the surface of neighborly greetings. The butcher's son and the miller's daughter steal glances during market days, their shy smiles like springtime sunshine. The town's constable grows suspicious of a string of missing chickens, and the culprit, a quick-fingered urchin, is caught and publicly reprimanded. Justice is a living thing here, as tangible as the soil beneath one's feet. As spring fades into summer, the town bakes under a harsher sun. The narrow streets shimmer with heat, and the smell of roasting herbs mingles with sweat and dust. Work does not pause. If anything, it intensifies. Fields must be tended, fires stoked, tradesmen must keep pace with demand. Children, older now, run errands and learn the finer points of their parents' crafts. The market square bursts with color and noise, a chaotic celebration of life's persistence. Inside the cool shadows of the church, priests intone solemn prayers, while outside, the townsfolk gather for festivals, saints' days marked by music, dance, and feasts. For one precious day, the ordinary hardships fall away. People wear their best clothes, rough linen dresses dyed with rare plant colors. Men down doublets patched with care and laughter rises above the din like birdsong. But beneath the joy, summer carries its own threats. Drought can parch fields and wells, threatening the harvest to come. Flies swarm around refuse heaps, spreading sickness. And in the crowded homes, tempers flare easily under the pressure of heat and hunger. In one small cottage, a mother cradles a fevered child, rocking gently and whispering soothing words. Her husband works the fields until dusk, his hands blistered and aching, haunted by the fear that this year's harvest may not be enough. Their children, wide-eyed and restless, listen to the crackling hearth fire, clutching rag dolls made from scraps of cloth. The days are long, the nights short, and sleep is a rare gift. In the evenings, the town gathers near the well or the tavern, where stories are shared beneath flickering torches. Old men tell tales of knights and dragons, while young women whisper rumors of the mayor's secret meetings. Songs rise and fall, voices blending into the rhythm of the night. Here, bonds are forged and secrets kept. As autumn arrives, the town slows. The air cools, leaves turn gold and crimson, and the work of harvest dominates every waking hour. Families band together to bring in crops before the first frost, hauling baskets heavy with apples, pumpkins, and root vegetables. Fields ring with laughter and song as men and women toil side by side, the fruits of their labor tangible and precious. For Marjorie, autumn means preserving enough grain and fruit to last the harsh months ahead. She presses apples into cider, boils herbs into tinctures, and bakes bread that will keep. Thomas's work shifts to repairing roofs and chimneys before winter's cold sets in. He feels a quiet satisfaction in the sturdy walls and warm hearths that will shelter the town's families. Evenings grow longer and quieter, the market emptier, the streets less crowded. Fires blaze in hearths, and the scent of smoked meats and spiced wine fills the air. Stories told at this time carry a weight of history and reflection, a reminder of the cycles that govern life and death, hope and hardship. Winter descends with unforgiving cold, blanketing the town in frost and silence. Snow muffles footsteps, smoke from chimneys rises in thick plumes, and the world seems to hold its breath. The market dwindles to a trickle. Food stores are guarded jealously. Children huddle by fires, listening to tales of saints and miracles, their eyes wide with wonder. This is a season of endurance. The sick are cared for by neighbors, food is rationed, and nights are long and lonely. Yet there is also warmth in shared meals, in whispered prayers, in the flicker of candlelight. The community draws closer, its members bound not only by necessity, but by shared resilience. In a small stone house near the edge of town, Marjorie sits by the fire, sewing patches onto a worn cloak. Her hands ache, but her heart is full. Outside, snowflakes drift silently, covering the world in white. She thinks of spring and the life it will bring, of children's laughter in the market square, of stone walls rising toward the sky. She thinks of Thomas and the countless others whose lives woven together make this town a living, breathing thing. And as you listen now, imagine the town settling into sleep beneath a star-studded sky. Hear the crackle of fires, the distant howl of wolves, the soft murmur of prayers from the church. Know that beneath this peaceful surface lies a world of endless toil and tiny triumphs, where every face tells a story, every stone holds a memory. Let the town rest. Tomorrow, the wheel turns once more. In the cold light of dawn, long before the first birds sing, Agnes rises. She is neither noble nor wealthy just, a widow with 2 small children and a stubborn spirit. Her husband died last winter, taken by the fever that swept through the village like a shadow. Since then, Agnes has carried the weight of survival alone. The thin woolen cloak she wraps around her shoulders does little against the biting chill, but she does not pause to shiver. She steps outside her humble cottage, feet sinking into frozen mud, breath rising in white clouds. The sky is a deep indigo, dotted with stubborn stars that refuse to fade. Agnes's first task is the fire. The hearth, cold and dark, is a silent enemy until coaxed awake with dried twigs and scraped bark. She stokes the embers with practiced hands, careful not to snuff out the fragile flame. Her children, still wrapped in tattered blankets, sleep uneasily inside. She pauses by the doorway, glancing back at their pale faces, then steps toward the barn. There, the cow waits, patient and gentle, her breath misting in the frosty air. Agnes works quickly, milking the animal with fingers stiff from cold. The warm milk she gathers will be a precious comfort later, maybe boiled into porridge or saved for a simple cheese. Her day will stretch endlessly. There will be wood to gather, water to fetch from the frozen well, repairs to the leaky roof, and food to prepare. But Agnes is no stranger to hard work. She learned it young, shadowing her mother, mimicking her movements until skill became muscle memory. Now, those lessons are her lifeline. Mid-morning finds her at the village market, where the stalls are few and the faces familiar. She trades eggs for salt, barters a small bundle of herbs for a wedge of cheese. Words are few but heavy with meaning, a nod here, a whispered warning there. News travels swiftly through the marketplace, carried by women who know the power of connection. Agnes listens carefully, storing away rumors of coming taxes, whispers of a stranger passing through, and the latest gossip about the baker's quarrel with the blacksmith. By noon, the sun, a pale disk behind clouds, struggles to warm the earth. Agnes returns home, her arms laden with firewood. Inside, she sets a pot over the fire, scraping dried nettles from the garden and adding barley to make a simple stew. The smell is earthy and comforting, a small victory against the gnawing hunger that lingers in winter. Her children play quietly nearby, fashioning dolls from rags and scraps of thread. Agnes watches them with a mixture of tenderness and worry. The future is uncertain, but she holds on to hope. the hope that they will survive, thrive, and perhaps one day know a life beyond hardship. Far from Agnes's modest world in a grand manor on the edge of town, Lady Eleanor awakens beneath heavy blankets embroidered with gold thread. She is the daughter of a noble family, destined for a life of privilege, but also of confinement. Her days are filled with lessons in embroidery, music, and manners. Yet beneath her fine gowns and jeweled necklaces lies a sharp mind and a restless heart. Lady Eleanor dreams of the world beyond the manor's walls, the bustling market, the fragrant gardens, the songs of the common folk. But her life is circumscribed by duty. She is expected to marry well, to bear heirs, and to maintain the family's honor. Her voice, though eloquent, must remain carefully measured. Rebellion would mean ruin. In the afternoon, she walks the gardens, the gravel crunching beneath her delicate shoes. She stops by a rose bush, tracing a finger over the soft petals. A gardener approaches, a young man with calloused hands and kind eyes. They exchange few words, but in those moments, fragile connection blooms, one that must remain hidden beneath the watchful eyes of servants and family. Meanwhile, at the convent just beyond the town's edge, Sister Matilda prepares for evening prayers. The stone walls echo with the soft murmur of chanting voices as candles flicker in the dim light. Matilda's life is one of devotion and discipline, bound by vows that shape every breath she takes. Yet even here, shadows stir. Matilda harbors secret doubts and dreams, longing for knowledge beyond Scripture, a yearning for the world outside these cloistered walls. She spends stolen hours copying texts by candlelight, her hands steady despite the fatigue. Among the illuminated manuscripts she carefully recreates are stories of saints and miracles, but also ancient wisdom whispered in forgotten languages. Tonight, as the bell tolls Compline, Matilda pauses, eyes lifted to the darkened window. Beyond, the stars shine cold and distant. She prays for guidance, for strength, for a sign that her path is true. As night deepens over the town, the streets grow silent, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the rustle of a breeze through bare branches. Inside, windows glow warmly, casting flickering light onto stone walls and muddy streets. In one home, a young boy dreams of adventure, of knights and dragons, of faraway lands beyond the hills. In another, an elderly woman counts blessings and regrets, her hands folded in quiet prayer. Across the town, life pulses softly, a rhythm of breath and heartbeat that will begin anew with the coming dawn. And so, as the moon rises high above the quiet village, casting its silver glow over thatched roofs and winding lanes, we pause to honor the lives that history often forgets. The woman who wakes before dawn, her hands worn but steady. The noble daughter dreaming quietly behind guarded walls. The devoted nun seeking light in shadowed halls. Each one bound by the invisible threads of duty, faith, and survival. Their stories may never have filled the pages of grand tomes or echoed in the halls of kings, yet they shaped the world in ways both small and profound. In the silent rhythms of their days, the whispered prayers, the shared labor, the guarded hopes, they were the heartbeat of a world both harsh and beautiful. Tonight, let us carry their quiet courage with us. Let their endurance lull us to rest. Their whispered songs calm our restless minds. For in remembering them, we keep alive the steady pulse of humanity's slow, unending story. So now, close your eyes. Let the stillness settle around you like a soft blanket. The fire is low, the night is deep, and the world for this moment is at peace. Sleep well.